Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid, and I know in the background it's a little off a little bit, but we're trying to get the truth out and we're trying to rush to do this because this was on the spur, on the moment thing, just to talk about a lot of stuff that's going on in the news, all right? We want to touch on a lot of things. I mean, it is absolutely still astonishing to me that the West have taken their gun, their bazooka, I should say, not a gun, but actually a nuke, and put it in the same room with them and mass detonate, because that's what they're doing. They are alienating everybody. I'm telling you that it is unreal what is going on. I sat back today. I was going to do a live early this morning, but I sat back and I wanted to see if anyone would talk on the news about what the European Union has done and what it's doing and what America's doing. And I saw some people cover it, so I was kind of happy about that. So I felt that I really didn't have to go into it, but I am going to have to talk about it a little bit. And I see a comment. CC is in the chat. CC, how are you doing today? But I just want to bring something to your attention. The way that the West, that is Brussels, London, Berlin, Paris, and Washington, D.C., the way they talk to people, the way they talk down to people, the way they are arrogant toward people with all of this Western hubris is actually the undoing of their Western world order. I was thinking about how the United States, as it talks to its so-called allies, talks down to them and makes demands. How she talks to her rivals and her enemies and talks to them and talks down to them, even as they are in a better position economically, or even if they are her military peer or near peer powers, she talks down to them as though she is the only one that can execute military operations. I was listening to Lindsey Graham, and I got to get to this real quick as I'm talking on a host of things. I'm gonna try to touch up on everything, try to keep this live a little short. I was thinking about Lindsey Graham, right? He's never seen a war he doesn't like unless he has to fight in it, and how he talks down. We should defend Taiwan, and we should do this. And when it comes to Russia, we should definitely support Ukraine and even deploy troops to Ukraine. Now, this is his reckless talking. And if they do something, we have nuclear weapons and we can do this, this, and this. And I'm saying to myself, when will it dawn on him that China has nuclear weapons? When will it dawn on him that Russia is the largest nuclear power on the planet? When will it dawn on him that America can deploy troops to Ukraine, but at the detriment to American national security? When will it dawn on him that he can deploy troops to Taiwan, but at the detriment to America's national security? Because they war gamed the scenario multiple times. And each time the United States has lost, and lost even quicker and more devastating when it comes to the Asia Pacific region in the war against China. I'm pretty sure since he sits on one of those committees, he has this information also. And what about deploying your troops to Ukraine when Russia has the advantage in every area in that region of the world? Being a superpower back 20 years ago is not being a superpower today. So the West talks down to people as if they are the parents and these people are children. They talk down to people as if they are the only ones that can initiate economic sanctions or military action. This shows you that there are screws loose upstairs with these political and military leaders. Now, common sense tells you to not threaten, to not talk down to, and not provoke, especially in the case of the survival of the state in a national security matter, a peer or near peer power that can exact upon you unacceptable damage. This is one thing about the nuclear doctrine. China built up its nuclear weapons, right, so that it can exact unacceptable damage on anyone trying to nuclear blackmail it. Russia built up its nuclear doctrine to outstrip the West. The combination of Western nations, that's France, Britain, America, and all of their deployment of nuclear weapons. And yet America talks down to them as if they can't exact retribution on her, or we'll nuke them, or we'll defeat them, as if they're going to sit there and allow this to happen. The goals of these people. But when you have been sitting on that in that ivory tower so long and looking down on everybody else, you can see the other ones rising up to be your peer, and in some cases surpassing you. We're looking at a world that is unhinged, but what we're going to do, we're going to look at the Western Empire through critical eyes, okay? So again, let us look at the situation as I was talking about at the beginning, and I'm going to, let me go to the chat real quick. Oh man, come on, YouTube, don't do me like that. Don't do me like that. I tell you. Let's see if they will allow me to come in here. Will they? All right. They knocked me out of the stream on my YouTube platform as I'm looking at you on the StreamYard. I just don't get it with them. Okay, now. Cece says, given that this country has violated Exodus 21:16 with the Atlantic slave trade, they're thinking nuking captive people will resolve them of their reparations. Now, I want to get to something. That says a lot right there, but I want to get to something that says a lot. But let us look at the situation that I was talking about with Europe. Europe has little to no natural resources, and the resources they have are not enough for the entirety of that small continent. Regardless of the map, listen to me good. I know you look at the map. These maps are out of place, I'm telling you. Because when you look at the situation, they make these European countries the size of nations in Asia or Africa or Latin America, and that is not the case. To give you the true scope of things, if you look at what was the entirety of Congo, you could put all of Europe in the Congo, or you can put all of Europe into Algeria, or all of Europe into Sudan. Serious. So to look at these maps, you really don't get a true picture of the geopolitical landscape, okay? But Europe has little to no resources. They follow America hook, line, and sinker. America has resources. Even though they have become expensive for the American corporations to mine or to excavate, she still has them nonetheless, okay? So certain things that America does and demands of Europe, Europe follows hook, line, and sinker, even though she has no cushion in the matter of all of this stuff, okay? So the European Union is now preparing a sanction package. I want you to think about the lunacy of this, okay? Because sometimes when we look at these things, we just look at them. We don't look into them. We don't dig into them. But I want you to look at the lunacy of this, okay? They're putting together a package of sanctions against China. China has done nothing to the European Union. They are talking about sanctioning 7 or 8 strategic corporations from China. Now, check this out. And at the same time, they're begging China for financial investment in the European Union. You know what that's tantamount to? That is like me going to CC, asking CC to loan money to renovate my house while I'm holding a gun to her children through the window as they play outside. The sheer lunacy of the policies of these people is astonishing. It's unbelievable. It's actually breathtaking. But most people don't address this because they don't care, or they don't see it, or they don't understand it. Now, at the same time that you're asking for development and you're asking for investment, at the same time, you're using sanctions as a weapon against your largest investor, your largest banker, your largest trade partner, and where you get 60 to 70% of all of your goods from. Make that make sense? because in the mind of an irrational person, that makes sense. But in the mind of rational people, you see the lunacy of it from the jump. So America sanctions these countries. Sanctions China. Now, China produces 92 to 93 or 95% of all the goods on America's shelves. Okay, America is looking to go to war and destabilize China because they realize that by 2025 there is no way that they'll be able to stop the decline of the U.S. and reverse it and prevent the rise and breakout capacity of China. Right, so they're trying to position themselves for a war with China. Now, here's the thing here. This has everything to do with what's going on with Ukraine. They thought that they can weaken Russia to a point where they can leave Russia bleeding and bleeding and bleeding, and then reposition themselves to fight a war against China and break China's back, and then go back and finish Russia off. Right? They thought that. So they wanted to destroy Russia, and they said this at the beginning of the Ukrainian war. We want to bleed the Russians. We want to destroy their economy and bring them to their knees. This is what they said. The French president said it. The German chancellor said it. The president of the European Union said it. The foreign minister of the European Union said it. Numerous other European officials said it. The United States said it through Nuland, through the National Security Advisor, through Blinken, and especially through Biden. When he said it, when he went to Poland and said it and announced it, that was what they wanted to do. Now, so they introduced these shocking off sanctions against Russia, and with little to no effect. They could not bring the Russian economy to its knees. Now listen, if you can't bring the Russian economy to its knees, guess what? That means there's funding for the Russian military forces. Now we have a blowback or boomerang effect, because now you're seeing the fallout of the sanctions. They don't want you to understand that these banks going belly up is the fallout to their sanctioning Iran, Venezuela, China, Russia, and other nations. They don't want you to understand that. They don't want you to understand that Russia's not feeling the blowback of this, because Russia was thrown out of the SWIFT system. Iran is not feeling the blowback of this because Iran was put out of the SWIFT system. Venezuela is not feeling it. They're feeling the sanctions that America put on them, but they're rebounding. Do you know, in the midst of these sanctions, do you know Maduro produced 5 million homes for low-income families? In the midst of all of these sanctions, he's doubled down on education in Venezuela, while they're cutting funding for education in the so-called richest nation on earth. Did you know that? Do you know why he's building houses under tremendous U.S. and Western sanctions? There's an explosion of homelessness within America. See how that works? Do you see how they sanction Russia? They sanction Russian oil, Russian gas, Russian commodities, Russian trade, right? And guess what's happening? Western trade, Western gas supplies, Western oil supplies are all tapped out. So all of this is the blowback of his policy. It's and none of your business. Man, I'm telling you, I love every time I see that name. I love that name. None of your business says it's a battle of capitalism versus commodities. Look like commodities is winning, and commodities will always win, because that's something tangible. We have to understand something. The Western economies, the Western financial order is all predicated on deception, theft, right? And predatory moves. That's what it's about. They had no goal and have no goal to bag the dollar, which means they can't bag the British pound. They can't bag the euro. It's only on the sheer fate of the people to accept it. And America got smart, and she went to Arabia and worked out an agreement to recycle dollars and build up some of those desert cities. If Arabia would accept dollars as the exclusive currency for oil, which means that the OPEC nations would follow suit. Well, we now see there's a shift in that. As a matter of fact, since we're on that, it comes as no surprise. As a matter of fact, let me go to this since we're on this. It comes as no surprise that America has sent officials to Arabia. This was after Syria was accepted back into the Arab League, and Russia and China have said that they would invest more in North African, West Asian region, right? And that Arabia said that they would gladly accept the yuan and trade. And now other nations like Pakistan and all of these other nations are bypassing dollar sanctions, euro sanctions, pound sanctions by trading and doing commerce in the Chinese yuan. So now in a panic mode, remember this is set off by the policies in Brussels, in London, and in Washington, D.C. And now, because of the turmoil, and we see that banks are teetering on the abyss, and we see that the British, it's no different than in Britain. Britain is also suffering from this. The European Union is also suffering from this, right? And now we see that the United States has dispatched a U.S. National Security Advisor and his team to Arabia to try to contain the outbreak of trade outside of the dollar. Matter of fact, since you don't know, now you're getting ready to know. Let us listen to this, okay? I want to play this real quick. I'm glad I had this on deck since we're talking about this. Listen.
Help us carry forward some very tangible initiatives that we think will be unlike anything that we have seen in the region in recent years.
U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has arrived in Saudi Arabia to rebuild relations as Washington is seeing regional power slipping through its fingers. Sullivan will meet with former bogeyman Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ahead of the Arab League summit, which could see the readmission of Syria, which was expelled in 2011. The visit is all about the timing. The US objects to the normalization of relations between Riyadh and Damascus. But let's recall that it's Washington that brought instability to Syria in the first place. The covert CIA program, Operation Timber Sycamore, saw more than $1 billion funneled to jihadist groups until then US President Donald Trump pulled the plug on it in 2017. And thanks to WikiLeaks, we know that back in 2011, Sullivan famously wrote to then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, telling her Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria.
Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. Otherwise, things have basically turned out as expected.
Declassified documents have also revealed that Washington was prepared to tolerate a Sunni caliphate on Syria's border with Iraq as part of the plot to weaken the country. Washington continues to try and derail any plans for peace in the region, openly warning its allies against normalizing relations with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. But this is a significant development, given that Riyadh was one of the main sponsors of the so-called rebels seeking to overthrow the Damascus government. Last month, the Saudi foreign minister visited Syria, where he met with Assad and said the kingdom supported his efforts to preserve the country's territorial integrity. While in Moscow, Turkey, Russia, Iran and Syria held talks during which the sides reaffirmed their desire to do the same, with a possible rapprochement between Damascus and Ankara on the cards. Tensions flared between the US and Saudi Arabia after the OPEC Plus countries agreed to cut oil production last year, which Washington warned would benefit Russia.
There's going to be some consequences for what they've done with Russia.
What kind of consequences? Menendez says suspend all arms sales. Is that something you'd consider?
I'm not going to get into what I'd consider and what I have in mind, but there will be consequences.
Of course, there were no consequences, and the cuts in oil production have continued, placing the relationship under further strain.
We don't think that production cuts are advisable at this moment, given market uncertainty, and we made that clear. But I'll tell you, we're focused on moving ahead here on prices for American consumers, not barrels.
But Riyadh responded harshly, threatening an oil embargo if there was any attempt to put a price cap on Saudi oil supplies.
Whether price caps imposed on a country or a group of countries on oil or any other commodity, this will lead to individual or collective counter-responses with intolerable consequences in the form of massive volatility and instability. So if a price cap were to be imposed on Saudi oil exports, We will not sell oil to any country that imposes a price cap on our supply, and we will reduce oil production. And I would not be surprised if others do the same.
Saudi Arabia has started to drift away from reliance on Washington and is even shifting from trading in the dollar, a move which has alarmed the White House. The Gulf Kingdom is among the 18 countries seeking to join the BRICS alliance, as Chinese and Russian influence grows in the region. In a bid to counter this, Sullivan says that the US is working hard to normalise relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, building on the normalisation deals brokered by the Trump administration. But it is Beijing that has reconciled long-term regional enemies, while pushing a plan for peace in Ukraine, which has been actively opposed by Washington.
We certainly want to express how concerned we would be by any proposals from the PRC that would, as I said yesterday, be one-sided and reflect only the Russian perspective. Again, you look at their 12-point so-called peace plan, it talks about a ceasefire. And a ceasefire now is, again, effectively the ratification of Russian conquest. It would, in effect, recognize Russia's gains and its attempt to conquer its neighbor's territory by force.
Washington's desperation comes as more countries are committing to adopting the Chinese yuan for trade transactions or using local currencies, leaving the US dollar behind. The loss of Saudi Arabia, Washington's main regional ally, will be a major blow. Will Sullivan's visit reverse the US waning grip on global hegemony? Does the Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria man have a plan? Or is the US in terminal decline?
Oh, you heard from Hillary Clinton that Al-Qaeda is on us, on the U.S. side. Now, before we go further into this, let us think about this. If Al-Qaeda is on their side, how can they be fighting? If they are in contact with the leaders and they're providing weapons and armament and training and political cover for them, why would you be fighting them? Or are you just pretending that you're fighting them so that you can occupy and wage war, so that you can siphon off resources, destabilize nations, so that the dollar can maintain its position as the world's global reserve currency? That seems like that is it, right? That's common sense, right? That's what it looks like. It's common sense. So let us go into something, okay? Also, they talked about Arabia and the dollar. This is why America is over there, not just because of the dollar, but also because she's losing influence in the region, and also because they understand that China and Russia are pushing in on them, and they can't maintain global hegemony if they lose Arabia, the main exporter of oil. Remember that the dollar is tied to the oil of Arabia, except in China's case, where now China is allowed to buy oil in the yuan. So we have a petrol dollar and a petrol yuan, right? Let's get into this. Now, I want to go back to something. I want to direct your attention back to something, okay? Now, I just Googled. Let me put in the words that I Googled. I put in the words White House spokeswoman on dollar, meaning when she spoke on a dollar. I know it's on Twitter, but I wanted to do something quick to bring it right up to you. So this is what the article says right here. And it's on the blogging hounds, like hound dogs, the blogging hounds. It says, White House admits countries worldwide refusing U.S. dollar. This is why that trip. That's why they sent the national security advisor, because the United States national security is at risk here. And you heard what Biden says, there will be consequences. See, they don't talk to you. They talk down to you and talk at you. They level the levels of threats to you. Matter of fact, let us see what threat, and we're going to go into this article, but I want you to see what threat, the word threat means. According to the dictionary, the word threat is a noun, right? And it says it's a statement of an intention to inflict pain, injury, damage, or hostile action on someone and retribution for something done or not done. This is how America talks. She talks with the language of threats. China must do this. China, the European Union does it too. They must do this. We're not threatened by China's rise, but if China expects to rise, then they must do this, this, and this. How the hell can you talk to an adult like that? How can you talk to so-called ambassadors and heads of state like that? If you talk to them like that, you don't respect them in that manner. Because on the streets or in suburban America or in the urban parts of America, if you talk to somebody like that, you may get your head split to the white meat. There's a respect factor there, and it's missing in the tone of U.S. politicians and European politicians towards everybody else. But they want you to talk to them with respect. Again, let's go to what threat means. A statement of an intention to inflict pain, injury, damage, or other hostile action on someone in retribution for something done or not done. So either you do what I tell you or you're going to pay the consequences. That's what they're saying to Arabia. This is what they're saying to Russia. This is what they're saying to China and Iran and Venezuela and these African nations that are trying to get out of the dollar. This is what they're saying to. They're talking to them with the language of threats. And as an adult, especially as a man, you're not going to let a man talk down to you. Either leave the room or there'll be some hostilities here. Right? But most people don't see that. So let's go to something. Let's go back to that article by the White House, on the White House. It says, White House admits countries worldwide refusing U.S. dollar. And this is what she had to say. White House spokeswoman Karen Jean-Pierre was asked what the Biden regime was doing about countries switching away from the U.S. dollars and using their own currency as settlement of foreign trade. Before we look at that, let us look at that part right there. If I am nation A and I have a currency that is for nation A, right? Then, of course, in my national interest, it is to use the currency that I produce, print, and that the labor and the resources of my country bagged, right? It is more conducive for me and my nation to benefit from this instead of using your nation's currency, right? Especially when you use that nation's currency as a weapon, all right? So now that we got that in our head, let us revisit that first sentence and then follow it up with the following sentences, okay? White House spokeswoman Karen Jean-Pierre was asked what the Biden regime was doing about countries switching away from U.S. dollars and using their own currency as settlement of foreign trade. Her response was stunning. Now, this is quote, switching to national currencies is a violation of the rights of American citizens, unquote. That's what she said. Why? Because of exceptionalism. No one on earth has a right to use their nation currency. Why? Because it benefits their nation and it doesn't benefit me. Everybody must use my currency so it benefits me. I can control your politics. I can control your commerce. I can control your finance. And I can interfere in your domestic and foreign affairs. And it benefits me because I get a cut of everything you do. And if you don't do that, you're violating the rights of the people of the empire. And by violating the rights of the people of the empire, that comes with it consequences of the U.S. military and the force behind it. That's what she's saying. That is exactly what she's alluding to. And listen what it says after that. The White House then threatened, see, threats. That's what they do, threat. The White House then threatened with sanctions those countries that refuse the dollar and mutual settlements. Okay, I'm going to sanction you if you use my currency and you don't follow my dictates, and I'm going to sanction you if you don't use my currency. This is what the U.S. does. And then when it doesn't work, she uses these extra judicial laws, territorial laws that violate international law and say, well, it's not working on you, so I'm going to sanction the other countries that are trading with you. If they accept your currency outside of my currency, then I'm going to break their economies down. As if these nations are territories or states of the United States. Do you understand the madness in the policy? So you don't have any rights to use your national currency for the benefit of your nation and your people. But if you don't use my nation's currency, then that's an act of war. That's what empires do. The language of threats, even when you lose it. Look at what's going on the Ukrainian battlefield. They continue to put sprinkles and coat it with caramel and strawberry on body excrement and put it on a cone and tell you that this is the new flavor of ice cream. Even as they're getting beat on the battlefield. The entire, not just Ukraine, not just the United States, but the entirety of the European Union and NATO. And they want you to believe because they have the better propaganda machine that they're winning. Bizarro world. Remember that. Bizarro world. Well, right is wrong, wrong is right, up is down, down is up, in is out is in. Day is night and night is day. And truth are lies and lies are truth. If I can tell you a lie long enough, and my lie becomes louder than your truth, I believe that I can put it over on the people. But they don't realize that truth always prevails in the end. It may be a long race, but in the end, truth prevails. But listen, let's go further. Switching to national currencies is a violation of the rights of American citizens. The White House then threatened with sanctions those countries that refuse the dollar in mutual settlement. It's already trending on social media. Now, think about the cojones one would have to threaten a nation that if you use your own currency to do trade that's beneficial to your own people and your own nation, to assert your own national sovereignty, economically, politically, and geopolitically, that's an act of war against me and the citizens of my country. Those are some cojones, aren't they? But you never look at it like that. But this is the reality of the empire. So we're looking at all of these things. We're looking at the entirety of the Western Empire through critical eyes. This is the only way that you can get a feel for what's truly going on. Okay? Now, before I go further, I want to say this. I want to thank everybody who has become a channel member to the Red Pill Diaries. I really, really appreciate it. A video will be dropping tonight, God willingly, for the channel members. It's already done. I had to have my son upload it or whatever like this. As you all know, if you've been listening to the channel, I am not a tech guy. That's not my generation. But my son will be uploading it and doing that tonight. So sometime tonight or early in the morning, you'll have a 40-some minute exclusive video for you on matters that go deep into what's going on in Asia and Africa and Latin America right now that the news and the alternative media is not reporting. Okay, so it'll be there. Again, thank you for joining and becoming a channel member. But again, I want to go to something because we're looking at the collapse of the Western world, right? Let me go to something real quick. All right, here we are. This is what I needed. Let me turn this computer this way. Hold on one second. Let me turn this one a little bit this way too. All right. I'm trying to get this going, okay? Everybody, give me a second. Now, there was an article that came out yesterday on Sputnik International. And the article is titled read, "If China ditches dollar amid emerging new trade order, consequences for U.S. could be stark." All right. Now, before I read that article, which I am going to read it to you, okay, I want to just take you to the lunacy of the policies of America and the Western world. Now, again, remember, the European Union is about to sanction China, which is its largest investor, its largest trade partner. And the majority of the goods on European shelves come from China. Europe has little to no resources to back up the euro. So how do they back up the euro? Through the good faith of everybody else and through the military might of America and by extension, NATO. So now you are threatening to sanction the very nation that is investing in you, your largest investor, your largest trade partner, the nation that puts the largest amount of money on the table for you in a win-win situation. You're doing this now. And then you want them to maintain good relations with you, but you must dictate to them how everything must go. And at the same time, you're provoking them. As a matter of fact, we're coming back to this dollar thing, because this has everything to do with the sanctions on China and the U.S. sanctions on China. They are trying to cower China so that they can live a little bit longer in their so-called rules-based order. And by extension, this is what they're doing to try to push China towards the edge, okay? Pay close attention to this short little video.
NATO is reportedly gearing up to open its liaison office in Japan, potentially the first such development in Asia. Denmark is currently responsible for communication between the alliance and Tokyo authorities. Copenhagen's ambassador told local Japanese media he fully supports the expansionist move.
It would be a very visible, real way to strengthen the relations between Japan and NATO.
Well, there is already a strong NATO presence in the Asian country, with U.S. troops stationed there since the end of World War II. Right now, American forces in Japan number around 50,000 personnel, including naval and air force detachments with offensive capabilities. In early 2022, Japan's former PM Shinzo Abe even suggested Tokyo should consider a NATO-style nuclear weapons sharing pact with the US. That's as NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg, during his visit to Japan in January, labeled its neighbor China a great threat to stability in the region.
China is substantially building up its military forces, including nuclear weapons, bullying its neighbors and threatening Taiwan, trying to control critical infrastructure and spreading disinformation about NATO and the war in Ukraine.
However, not everyone in Japan agrees with their government's stance on strengthening ties between the nation and NATO in Washington. People have regularly been taking to the streets to protest against related issues, including a lack of legal accountability for U.S. military personnel there, water contamination from American bases, as well as Tokyo's rising defense spending, which threatens to derail the post-war pacifism policy. Well, we heard from the co-director of International Action Centre think tank, Sarah Flounders, who says NATO's courting of Japan is a sign of the U.S. attempting to strengthen its position in East Asia.
First of all, NATO is a military alliance, a U.S. commanded, U.S. equipped military alliance that exists for war, not for trade, not for diplomacy, not for social progress, for war. And so this new opening of NATO officially to Japan is one step further, along with bringing nuclear weapons on submarines into Korea and building new bases, U.S. military bases in the Philippines, all this in violation of each country's own constitution and trade agreements. In violation of the Japanese constitution. Japan is more than doubling its military. So the arrangement with NATO is just one step and part of a whole series. Really, the basis for it is that there are greater levels of trade of Taiwan with China, Japan with China, Korea with China, the Philippines with China, than with the United States. And how will the United States go about breaking that and setting up something more advantageous to corporate power in the U.S.? How will they reverse this? That's why they want to bring in NATO, the military threat.
See, and this is what's crazy, right? Man, these people are crazy as hell. And they don't respect your thought capacity at all. Now, NATO is a military alliance, and you have the Secretary General stating that China is seeking to provoke and build up military infrastructure now in its own yard now. But NATO is allowed to expand to Japan, and that's not a threat, and that's not being threatening or building up military infrastructure. Do you see? Now, that didn't happen in a void. This is what I'm saying to you. Remember, America just arm twisted and neck choked the Philippines into allowing them to take over 4 military bases in the Philippines? Remember that? You remember that just happened, right? That did not happen in a void. Remember when America said that she was going to double down and strengthen her bases in Guam and in Japan, right? And then out of the blue, now, mind you, remember, America controlled militarily NATO, okay? So on May 7th, now this guy's in the hospital. He used to be the prime minister of Europe, Berlusconi, of Italy. I mean, and then he comes out and says the EU is defenseless against China. What the heck? What are you talking about? The EU is defenseless. We all know that the EU and NATO are one and the same. One is the political wing, one is and the economic wing, and one is the military wing, right? So he says that we must step up defense cooperation. This is when they mean offense. They always use defense as a cover, but it's actually offensive. There's nothing defensive about the Pentagon. There's nothing defensive about what's going on with all of these war machines. Okay, there's nothing defensive about that. That is actually for offensive purposes, right? If that was for defense, then why in the hell is America and Europe on the continent of Africa with multiple bases, even as the people there cry for them to leave? That's not defensive. That's offensive. When you go somewhere that's not yours and you occupy there, that's offensive. Because if one of them came to America, that would not be allowed because the people would be in an uproar about a foreign nation's military on American soil. They would say that this is an attack against America and American Constitution. Well, hell, if America does it, is that not an attack on those nations? This is what I'm saying. But Western hubris allows for this to take place. Now, mind you, this does not happen in a void, okay? So we hear that, and we hear NATO's expansion, the North Atlantic Terrorist Organization. So this is what comes out today. The headline is this: EU plans to punish China for trade with Russia. Remember what I say, those extrajudicial laws, those extraterritorial laws. See, what the EU is doing is what America's done. If I don't agree with what you're doing, I'm going to sanction you. Now, China has nothing to do with the beef between America and Russia or Europe and Russia. And Europe said they don't have a beef with China, yet they are imposing sanctions on China because China is an ally to Russia. See, in their mind, the only people who are able to have allies and to aid each other is the West. The West can pump money and weapons into Israel, but Iran better not do it into Syria. The West can pump weapons into Al-Qaeda, but Iran cannot help Hezbollah. America in the West can pump arms and Nazis into Ukraine, but Russia, which has a claim to some of those a historical claim on some of those Russian territories in Ukraine, cannot go in to defend itself, even though America says we're in Syria to defend ourselves, so they don't come here. Thousands of miles away, illegally occupying a third of Syria. But that's for national security purposes. But Russia can't go into former Soviet territory to defend itself against NATO's aggression against it in former Russian territory. Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar, I can and you can. I am and there is none other. That's the mentality of the West. And it's starting to cause the breakdown of the so-called rules-based order. Now it says, listen to this. A new sanctions package will reportedly target 7 Chinese firms. And then you ask yourself, aren't the Chinese trying to invest in Europe? Aren't the Chinese trying to see? Because at one time, Europe and America had the monopoly on technology. But China was going to put a high-speed railing and trains there, invest in the infrastructure, build it up, right? And make it a part of the Belt and Road Initiative so it can be a win-win situation. But the West, if I can't control it, it's not happening. If I can't dominate, it's not happening. If I can't dictate, it ain't gonna happen. So listen, it goes and says, the European Union is seeking to tighten its economic screws on Russia. Now listen to this. I want you to see the lunacy of this statement here, okay? The European Union, i.e. NATO, is seeking to tighten its economic screws on Russia by sanctioning China. I'm not making this stuff up. I promise you, it's in the article. I told you they can't say these things and to write these things. There is no way they can respect your intellect. There's no way. That is like me saying, I'm going to sanction CC by sanctioning all of the viewers of the show. That's sheer lunacy. But only in the bizarro world. But let's go further. And I'm not making this up. You can go and pick this up on RT. All you have to do is put in, what did I put in the search engine? EU China or China EU. That's all you have to do in the search engine on that website and put it in, and the article will pop up. So I'm not making this stuff up. I'm not embellishing anything. I'm reading to you what is written, what was spoken. Now, when somebody reads it back to you, you see the madness in the statements, right? But listen, the European Union is seeking to tighten its economic screws on Russia by sanctioning China. Chinese companies that conduct trade with Moscow, the Financial Times reported on Sunday. Make that make sense. I'm asking anyone in the chat to make that statement make sense. They are seeking, right, to turn the economic screws on Russia by sanctioning Chinese companies. That's what I thought. When somebody put it out there like that, then you have to, man, what? Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. So when I read this stuff, immediately I'm like, come on, man. You got to respect these people a little bit better than this. But it says, 7 Chinese businesses have been named in a new package of restrictions that the EU member states will discuss this week. The report says, citing a copy of the sanctions list seen by the paper. Now, I'm going to go back to what it said. 7 Chinese businesses have been named in a new package of restrictions. Restriction is what you put on children that disobey your orders, right? When you punish your child for staying out too late or for not cleaning up, you put them on what? Restriction. China is not the EU's child. This is what I'm telling you. They talk down to these people. And then they want you to believe that they have your best interest at heart. Make it make sense. Make it make sense. Matter of fact, give me a second with you guys real quick. Let me read. Okay. Okay. Now the dictionary for restriction means noun. It's a noun. A limiting condition or measure, especially a legal one. Similar, reduction, limitation, diminution, curtailment, cutback, cut, limitation, constraint, control. All right? To curb and to regulate. That's what parents do to children. And the EU is talking about this as if China is their child. This is what, man, I'm telling you. Oh, my God. I'm telling you, how can you expect to maintain your way, maintain economic prosperity when you are sanctioning the very people who invest in you, the very people who lend to you, and the very people who ship thousands of shipments of goods to your shelves to keep them stocked? You think unemployment is bad now. You think bankruptcy is bad now. You think the system is blowing up now. Sanction China and see what happens. We see it in America right now. How the economy is collapsing at breakneck speed. I mean, it is absolutely unreal. I'm telling you this. And we do all of this on the cuff to show you that these people are crazy as hell. Man, I tell you what. So, Astro Atmosphere says, I ain't get my notifications. Well, guess what? Let me tell you about this, and we'll go back to this. So last night we were monitoring, last night and night before last, and this morning we were monitoring this platform. And every time we got 10 to 12 new subscribers, and we have proof, we have picture proof that we took screenshots. Every time we got 10 to 12, 6 to 8 were taken. So I didn't expect everybody to get their notification, because it seems like when I talk to them about it, they say, well, we think there were bots and this, and this is crazy. But this is what you have to go through. This is what we have to go through, okay? I apologize for that. Again, let me say, there's a video dropping for the channel members tonight or early in the morning. It's already done, and it's going to go into depth on a lot of things: the Middle East, Africa, Latin America, Asia, and what's going on in Europe, and how it's all connected, okay? So that'll be on for channel members. Now, let me go back to something. Where was I at? Restriction. Control. This is the thing that they want most. Control. And this is why they are loading up their gun and putting it to their own heads, thinking that they're going to shoot somebody else, when in reality they're killing their own society. You don't produce anything. Okay? Germany was the economic workhorse or an engine of the European Union. It has been deindustrialized. So if that was the number 2 economy in the Western world, number 2 only to the United States in the Western world, and it has been deindustrialized. And I was reading an article last week where a business that had been in business in Germany, I believe since they said since 13 something or 14 something, 1400 and something, had to shut its doors because they could no longer afford the price of heating and oil and gas. Google it. I'm not making this stuff up. Google it. So Germany, the workhorse in the economic engine of the European Union, has been deindustrialized, right? You have little to no resources. And America and Great Britain are suffering an economic meltdown. And you want to put cherry on top of the cake by aggravating and provoking the one nation that can help you out. How does that make any sense? This shows you that God has to have them smitten with derision, because any common person with just an ounce of common sense that sees these things recognize that the policy moves and the policy initiatives of those in power who are supposed to govern with prudence are inept and irrational. Right? Let's go further. So remember we just talked about this Japanese base. Now let's go back, but for NATO. And remember that the United States is reinforcing her bases in Guam and in Japan. And she has just talked about reinforcing her bases in South Korea. South Korea is the size of the state of Alabama, I believe, or Mississippi, one of those two, I can't remember. But America has more military bases in South Korea than she has in both of those states put together. more military facilities in South Korea than she has in 2 of her own states at home. All right? She just sent a nuclear-armed, nuclear-powered submarine to South Korea, right? And now she's publicly announcing that she may share nuclear weapons with South Korea. This is not against North Korea. This is against China. All while stoking tensions. And remember that she's got to try to beat China before the end of 2024, or else this is an irreversible decline. This is what she says. Okay? Let's go back to something. If China ditches the dollar amid emerging new trade order, consequences for U.S. could be stark. Check it. So now she has the National Security Advisor and his team on their, over there in Arabia, trying to threaten, because they don't talk, they don't negotiate, they demand and threaten, right? With the leaders over there, that if you don't do X, Y, and Z, we'll destabilize you. You see what happened in Libya. You see what happened in Somalia. You see what's going on in Yemen. You see what's going on in Syria, in Iraq, and the surrounding areas. We may do it to you. Now, I want to, before we move further, I want to put something to the average person's mind, okay? I'm going to bring something up to you all. And I just want you to just think about this. Put that in your noggin and think about this. And this is not religious. This is not racial. This is factual, okay? Now, how would you feel? I'm talking to the Western world. If Arabia or Syria or Algeria or Libya under Gaddafi or any of these nations like that, Iran, Iraq, had 24 military bases in the Vatican or in Rome or anywhere around that area, how would you feel about that? That is unacceptable to you, right? But nobody talks about America has at least 4 military bases just 40 miles from the holiest city in Islam, and from Mecca, and from Medina. Could this be the reason why those people over there are so mad with the Western world? Not your freedoms. Could this be the reason? Could this be one of the main reasons? The 3 holiest cities in Islam is Mecca, Medina, and Jerusalem. And all of them are under occupation or near occupation. Could this be the reason? I'm putting it on your mind because the reason I told you, I don't let anything slide. I call an ace and a spade, even if it vilifies me or causes me to lose subscribers, because you have to do that. You have to be just blunt with people and put stuff on their mind and make them think. Is it the U.S. and the Western freedoms that they're mad at and want to get rid of them for? Or is it because they're disregarding those people's faith and just treating them with contempt? I want you to think about it. What if Arabia had 4 military bases close to 20 to 40 miles from the Vatican? How would that suit you? This is what so America is threatening Arabia, right? She's not going over there negotiating. You heard what Biden says, that there will be consequences for them using the Chinese yuan. So if they're using the Chinese yuan and they just sent the national security team over there with the national security advisor because nations are moving outside of the dollar, what the hell do you think they're discussing? Huh? So let's go further since we got it on your mind. It says, if China ditches dollar amid emerging new trade order, consequences for U.S. could be stark. A growing number of countries are opting to diversify settlement currencies, stepping away from only using the U.S. weaponized dollar or ditching it altogether in favor of the yuan, the increasingly internationalized currency of China, a top trading partner. Listen to this good. A top trading partner of more than 140 countries. Now, there's only like 205 countries. China is the top trading partner to 140, including America, including the European Union. So what sense does it make for these nations to use a third party to do trade, where that third party gets to peep in on all of the commerce, and then if they want to, they can intervene, when all these countries have to do is cut out the middleman and use the convenient currency of choice, which is the Chinese yuan? Huh? All right, let's go further. We use common sense here because common sense is not so common in today's world. So let's go further. It says, if Beijing abandons the US dollar in trade settlement, the United States will be faced with stark consequences, a Chinese news outlet has warned. Now, why did the Chinese news outlet warn this? Huh? Because of all of the provocations and the threats coming from the West. They wanted to remind the United States, hey, listen, you're not in any position to threaten anybody. You are the greatest and the largest debtor in the history of the world. Your on-book debts, your acknowledged debts, are astronomical. Your off-book debts, those black debts, are unfathomable. So you are not in any position, because if we run out the dollar and we are the largest trading partner to 140 countries, guess what's going to happen after that? There will be a stampede of nations exiting the dollar, which means that the dollar will collapse, which means the stock market will collapse, which means that the United States will be flooded with dollars, which means that inflation, hyperinflation, would come home. And that means that America would not be able to fund all of these budgets, these $100 billion budgets of intelligence and military, right? That means that all of these hundreds of acknowledged bases and the once acknowledged thousands of bases would have to be closed, and the troops would have to be brought home, because the expenses would be too astronomical for the empire to carry that type of burden. So they're giving them a nudge and telling them, look, calm down, man, with your provocations, with your threats. You'll force our hand to do this. And if we do this, look at what would be the outcome of us doing this. But remember, America has no pause, no reverse. She sees the wall. She's going 250 miles. Now she's in a Yugo, a souped up Yugo. And she's going towards that reinforced, triple thick concrete wall, saying that I'm going through this wall, even though the wall had guardrails in front of it. This is what the empire is doing. She's speeding towards total annihilation. Let's go further. Listen to this good. Underscoring that a new trade order is emerging. Stop right there. What is underscored by a new trade order? And who dominates that new trade order? It is China that dominates the new trade order. You just read, over 140 nations, China is the number one trade partner, number one investor to 140 nations, and she's number 2 or number 3 to the rest of them. Right? Everything that America once dominated in, that Chinese have outstripped her in. All right? This is the new paradigm, the new reality, the not so palatable reality for the deep state, for the neoliberals and the neocons. But it's the new reality nonetheless. All right? It goes and says, underscoring that a new trade order is emerging, the report highlighted the global trend of de-dollarization as paving the way for China's currency, the yuan. As the People's Republic of China boasts the status of one of the world's largest trading countries, if Washington opts to decouple from China, this might set off a domino effect, just what I just told you all, with increasingly more countries preferring to trade with China using the yuan as an exchange currency, as it was noted, just like I just explained. Why did I explain that before even reading that? Because that was common sense. If I read the first sentence in the first paragraph, common sense tells me what comes next. Okay? And it goes and says, we are for de-risking and diversifying, not looking to decouple, U.S. National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan said at the Brookings Institute in late April in reference to China's economy. However, the report underlined that imports of consumer goods by the U.S. plunged 20.6% year on year in the first 3 months of this year. If the decline trend continues, it will in turn accelerate. Listen to this part. It will in turn accelerate the global de-dollarization trend, warned the publication. Meanwhile, the share of the yuan, also referred to as the renminbi, in the Republic of China's cross-border payments shot up 48% in March, data cited by the report. Now, one is on the ascension and one is on the decline. We know which one is ascending because we see the provocations by the one who's declining, right? And all while this is going on, America's facing economic chaos and she's trying to push the world to war. Listen, she feels that, okay, I'm losing, but if I can destabilize and while I'm at this point, I'm in declining, but I'm still the preeminent military power globally because I can deploy more resources different places right now. So if I can catch them right now at this very moment, maybe I can offset the decline. That's wishful thinking. That's wishful thinking, right? That's the hope strategy with nothing really tangible behind it because all of the economic, political, and geopolitical barometers measure at a point that America cannot offset the rise of China. America cannot stop the growth of China's economy nor its military. So that's the hope strategy, okay? America is hoping that she can maintain dollar hegemony. She's hoping that she can outstrip China. She's hoping that maybe the world will be coward because I'm confronting both superpowers at the same time. And if I'm confronting them, guess what I'll do to the small powers? She's hoping this. But the reality of the situation is quite different. And she's quickly finding out that as she spreads chaos abroad, chaos is now being spread at home. I want you to pay close attention to this clip.
This would be really the first time in the history of America that we would fail to make payments that are due. We would simply not have enough cash to meet all of our obligations. And
I'm going to replay that, but guess what she said? I'm going to play the first part again and stop it. And then we're going to read some, then I'm going to play the whole thing.
This would be really the first time in the history of America that we would fail to make payments that are due. We would simply not.
There's a lie. Let's go to something. Okay? There's an article that the Hill put out, the HILL put out. And it says the U.S. has never defaulted on its debt except the 4 times that it did. Remember in one of the shows we went into the time that America defaulted on her debt, right? Now, number 1, the default on the U.S. government's demand notes in early 1862. They did it in 1862, all right? Number 2, the overt default by the U.S. government on its gold bonds in 1933. Something very strategic about 1933. But we'll get into that at a later time, okay? Number 3, then the U.S. government defaulted in 1968 by refusing to honor its explicit promise to redeem its silver certificate paper dollars for silver dollars. Nobody talks about that. And number 4, just a few years later, the 4th default was was the 1971 breaking of the U.S. government's commitment to redeem dollars held by foreign governments for gold under the Bretton Woods Agreement. So just prior to Nixon taking the world off the gold and silver standard in 71, in 68, they took us off the silver standard. They defaulted at least 4 times. But they don't want you to hear that. They don't want you to understand that. But let's go further, and I'll let you hear this. I just had to preface what you're going to hear with the reality of the times and the situation, okay? You're not going to get information this thorough, this deep on any other platform. By far, we are the most informative, most powerful platform on the web. Check this out. Let's listen to it again.
This would be really the first time in the history of America that we would fail to make payments that are due. We would simply not have enough cash to meet all of our obligations. And it's widely agreed that financial and economic chaos would ensue.
Yellen and her cabal of people at the Treasury putting more and more and more pressure on elected politicians to give them more money. It's kind of like if you and I went to the casino, we asked someone for some money, we went there, we spent all the money, we went back and asked for more. And, you know, a lot of people are sort of equating it to and telling Yellen, you're putting a gun to Congress's head again, to the American people even. We've actually got a clip so we can just show you how much he's begging and borrowing and bartering in order to try and get this done.
These negotiations should not take place with a gun really to the head of the American people, because...
But they are taking place with that gun to the head of the American people.
Well, it's important for Congress to meet a responsibility. Since 1960, the debt ceiling has been raised 78 times, 3 times during the prior administration, always with bipartisan support.
Well, as we can see from that, Nikki, you're seeing that they're basically saying, look, it's been done 60 times before, so do it again. They're even wheeling Biden out now to go and meet next week with as many Republicans as he can to try and get this through. And people have a bit of a short memory, I think, in the US. People don't realise that the reason that the House Speaker got elected, if we cast back to that, we covered it quite a lot on the channel, there was a load of backhanded doors, back deals being done to try and get the debt ceiling raised again. And this basically got this guy his job. And goodness knows what they're talking about and what kind of concessions or what kind of backroom deals they're going to be doing in order to get this through. It's quite ludicrous, really.
Well, let's say lawmakers don't raise the debt ceiling. What kind of consequences would the US economy face?
Well, it could be devastating, Nikki. Again, it's never happened before because, as Yellen says, it always gets done. Right. But if that did happen, the US wouldn't be able to service its debt. Now, the point that a country can't service its debt, it goes into economic freefall. Now, the biggest problem with the US economy doing this is that the world's global reserve currency, up until this point, really, until very recently, now we're seeing the rise of the renminbi, but it is predominantly in the world's reserve currency. You could see economic freefall, not just for the US, but all of the allies that are associated with that country.
And how realistic is the prospect of the US defaulting on its debt? And would that potentially drag the entire global economy down with the dollar?
Yeah, it's a really great question, Nikki. I think, look, there is a prospect. We're even seeing the IMF talking about this. The chief of the IMF came out this week and said, look, she's very concerned about multipolarity. She didn't use those words. She used another word, sort of like for the global economy. Well, I would disagree with her. I think there's a big problem for the US if this happens and her allies. But we're seeing now the rise of China in a really big and profound way, the rise of Russia, the rise of multipolarity. We're even seeing the Saudis turn around now and say, if you sanction our oil, then we're going to respond and sanction you. So could be a huge, big problem for the US. It could be the end of the behemoth, which is the US dollar, and the rise of a multipolar world order, which we talk about all the time here.
It's interesting, though, because after Janet Yellen there issuing this cry for help, if you like, she's planning to visit Japan and for a G7 finance ministers summit to assure Washington's partners that the US financial system is safe and sound. So despite the fact that several banks have collapsed in recent weeks and months, just how well is the American economy really doing?
Well, it's pretty crazy, Nikki, isn't it? Because I guess in the days before 24 hours news and social media, maybe they could get away with it. But if they don't think that the finance ministers of other countries are watching the news even, or reading anything, or even scrolling through Twitter, they'll see that the US economy is not doing very well at all. And again, I'll go back to that point about the IMF. If the IMF is saying there's trouble afoot, there's real trouble afoot. And if she thinks she can walk in and try and calm the markets at the same time as going on primetime American TV and telling America that the whole country is an absolute mess, it's a really funny message to send to the world.
Boom goes the dynamite. And that's why America is trying to destabilize and beat Russia. And that's why she's trying to reposition and pivot to Asia to prevent China's breakout capacity, because she sees an end to dollar hegemony, which means an end to this excessive spending of the empire and these privileges that come along with having the dominant military and the dominant economy and the dominant currency of the world. On that note, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for joining me on another hard-hitting program for truth. Again, I got to say, for the members, please, if you are a member, check out the new video that drops tonight or early in the morning. If you haven't been a member, please think about joining. If you are a subscriber, thank you for subscribing. If you haven't subscribed, think about subscribing and also being a part of this movement to get the truth out, unfettered truth out to each and every one of you. On that note, I go out the same way I came in, always, with love and peace for those of you who love and truth, and have it in your heart for everybody else, because this is what God has for you. Try to be a reflection of divine towards everybody else. I love you, but God, he will always love you best. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. Hey, mama, guess what? Your baby boy loves you more than life. Deuces, everybody.